What's the most ridiculous reason you found yourself in court? I got summoned to court over a missing garden gnome worth $20 that I never even took, and the whole thing spiraled into the most absurd legal battle in our small town's history. It all started when my neighbor Mrs. Peterson accused me of stealing her garden gnome, a little ceramic guy with a red hat that she claimed had sentimental value because it resembled her late husband Frank, which was strange because Frank had been 6'4" with no beard. But that's beside the point. She marched over to my house one Sunday morning, banging on my door, screaming about gnome napping and threatening to call the police. I tried explaining that I hadn't taken her gnome, but she wouldn't listen, even when I invited her to search my property, which in hindsight was a mistake because she took that as permission to conduct weekly gnome hunts in my yard. For the next month, she'd show up unannounced with a flashlight peering into my windows and digging through my flower beds. Convinced I was hiding Frank Jr., as she called it, things escalated when she hired a private investigator, a retired cop named Mitch, who started taking photos of me coming and going from my house and following me to the grocery store. He even set up a stakeout in his car outside my house, eating donuts and drinking coffee for 3 days straight until I finally called the police myself. But here's where it gets truly ridiculous. Instead of telling Mrs. Peterson to back off, the police officer who responded was her nephew, who suggested we handle this through small claims court. So I found myself being served actual legal papers over a $20 garden gnome. I had to hire a lawyer for $500, which was 25 times the value of the gnome, just to defend myself against accusations of grand gnome theft. The day of court arrived, and Mrs. Peterson showed up with 12 character witnesses, all members of her garden club, who testified about her deep emotional attachment to her ceramic gnomes. She had brought photos of the missing gnome in a family album, and even a ceramic gnome expert who testified about the emotional damage caused by gnome separation anxiety. My lawyer looked at me like we'd entered the Twilight Zone, but the real twist came when the judge asked for evidence, and Mrs. Peterson proudly presented security camera footage from her bird feeder camera showing the real culprit, a raccoon that had dragged the gnome into the woods behind our houses. The footage clearly showed the raccoon struggling with a gnome for 10 minutes before finally managing to drag it away. The judge tried to maintain his composure, but lost it when Mrs. Peterson demanded I pay for raccoon removal services and emotional damages for being an accessory to the raccoon because, and I quote, "he feeds the neighborhood strays." And that raccoon was clearly one of his accomplices. The case was dismissed, but the story doesn't end there. 2 weeks later, Mrs. Peterson's gnome mysteriously reappeared in her garden covered in mud and missing its red hat. The local paper ran a story called "The Great Gnome Heist" with my picture next to a raccoon mugshot. And now every year on the anniversary, our town holds a gnome festival where people dress up as gnomes and raccoons and reenact the great gnome theft of 2018. I still get random people asking me to sign their garden gnomes, and the raccoon became our unofficial town mascot. I've since moved, but I still get Christmas cards addressed to the gnome thief, and last year received a ceramic raccoon statue from an anonymous sender that looked suspiciously like Mrs. Peterson's handwriting.